They say economic revolutions are obvious only in hindsight, but every now and then history leaves a faint tremor before the earthquake. And right now, those tremors are building, quietly, methodically, almost politely, across boardrooms, militaries, energy grids, and digital networks. The world looks distracted by headlines, political arguments, inflation scares, tech layoffs, diplomatic tensions. But behind that noise, something far more consequential is unfolding: a rearrangement of power, a rewiring of incentives, a redesign of money itself. This is where the pattern begins, not with collapse, but with recalibration, not with explosion, but with architecture. Here's what nobody tells you. New global economies are never declared. They are constructed, brick by invisible brick, treaty by backdoor treaty, algorithm by algorithm. Every major shift, from the Genoese banking web of the 1500s to the gold-backed British Empire in the 1800s to the American dollar order forged in 1944, followed the same hidden blueprint. First, a shock, then a vacuum, then a new set of rules written by the players who survived the shock. And here's why this matters right now. Analysts suggest that the shocks of the 2020s are not isolated events. They may be the early chapters of a transformation whose consequences will be felt for decades. If you trace the last 5 centuries, 3 moments stand out like warning buoys in a storm. In 1620, when the Dutch East India Company discovered the power of globalized capital flows. In 1944, when the world, exhausted by war, gathered at Bretton Woods and placed the US dollar at the helm of global exchange. And in 1971, when the dollar severed its tie to gold, turning money into pure political energy, able to expand or contract at will. Each moment emerged from chaos. Each moment redefined wealth, and each moment created new winners and new losers. But today's moment is different. For the first time, 3 forces, technology, geopolitics, and resource scarcity, are acting simultaneously, pulling the world into uncharted waters. Money is no longer just a medium of exchange. It is becoming data, surveillance, leverage, and national armor. If this pattern applies, then the quiet moves being made right now, by nations you expect and nations you don't, may determine who controls the value flows of the next century. Let me show you exactly how the pattern begins. It starts with divergence. Throughout history, powerful nations do not collapse all at once. They drift. Their incentives splinter. Their alliances strain. Their currencies wobble. The same occurred in the late 1800s as Britain's pound sterling began losing ground to an industrializing United States and a rising Germany. Investors at the time thought this was temporary, but it wasn't a pause, it was a pivot. Today, some economists argue that the current divergence between Western monetary systems and Eastern resource-backed experiments mirrors that earlier shift. Case number 1 emerges from the 1930s. The Great Depression wasn't just an economic disaster, it was a global power reset. As currencies failed, trade routes broke, and regimes fell, the United States quietly accumulated the largest gold reserves in modern history. Everyone else was drowning. America was collecting lifeboats. By 1944, the world had little choice but to anchor itself to the dollar, not because the dollar was mystical, but because America controlled the mechanism that mattered most: stability, or at least the illusion of it. But here's what nobody tells you. The Bretton Woods system wasn't designed merely to rebuild the world. It was designed to shape it. It established rules for capital flows, cross-border trade, and currency valuation. It was more blueprint than treaty. And today, analysts suggest that a similar blueprint may be forming, not in a New Hampshire hotel, but in the digital backstage of central banks, energy ministries, and sovereign wealth funds. Case number 2 begins in 1973, when the U.S. struck a strategic deal with Saudi Arabia, effectively giving birth to the petrodollar. Oil would be sold exclusively in U.S. dollars. In return, the U.S. would protect the kingdom militarily. At first, it looked like a miracle. Money flooded back into American markets. The dollar became indispensable. Nations hoarded it, traded it, respected it. But then the bill arrived. The system required constant energy control, constant military presence, and constant geopolitical alignment. Over time, cracks formed, and today, analysts indicate that some resource-producing nations are exploring alternative payment systems, some digital, some commodity-backed, some entirely new. The danger wasn't what they saw. It was what they ignored. The third force reshaping the global economy right now is technology, specifically the convergence of artificial intelligence, digital currencies, and decentralized communication. For 2 centuries, money traveled slowly. Banks acted as gatekeepers. Governments acted as architects. But now, money can move at the speed of an algorithm. AI can price risk faster than regulators can understand it. And digital currencies, whether government-controlled or decentralized, can rewrite who gets to issue value in the first place. Here's the mechanism. Every major empire has relied on its ability to define money. Rome minted its coins. Britain standardized its banking networks. America built SWIFT, the IMF, and the World Bank. But AI-driven economics blur the boundaries. In some scenarios, value could be issued by private corporations, autonomous networks, or multinational coalitions. Not government control. Mutualized influence. Not a single reserve currency. A competing lattice of financial systems, each backed by different forms of trust. This is where the early cracks reveal themselves. Trade disputes that appear petty may be signals of larger restructuring. Sanctions that seem targeted may be tests of financial resilience. Currency swaps between emerging nations, barely reported in mainstream media, may be the first drafts of a post-dollar settlement layer. And the rise of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, may be the clearest sign of all. Not because they are futuristic, but because they allow nations to redesign money from the inside out. Programmable, traceable, real-time. Some economists argue that CBDCs could become the new geopolitical battleground, not fought with missiles, but with microsecond transaction controls. A nation that can monitor flows can influence them. A nation that can influence flows can redirect them. And a nation that can redirect them can reshape global power without firing a shot. But here's why this matters. The average person may feel none of this unfolding. They see inflation. They see rising mortgage costs. They see instability. But they don't see the blueprint being drafted beneath those symptoms. They don't see the negotiations, the alliances, the technological arms race, the quiet race to define the next financial operating system for the planet. Look at energy transitions. In the 1800s, coal built empires. In the 1900s, oil crowned superpowers. In the 2000s, natural gas and renewables began to shift leverage once again. Each shift reordered trade. Each shift reshaped borders. Each shift forced nations to redesign their monetary systems according to their resource strengths or vulnerabilities. Today's transition, from fossil fuels to a mix of renewables, electrification, DAS, and rare earth mineral extraction, may be the foundation of the next world order. Some scenarios suggest that nations controlling lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earths could shape the next reserve systems, just as nations controlling oil shaped the last. But history warns us that nothing stays dominant forever. The Dutch lost their edge. The British lost their empire. And even the U.S., analysts say, faces a future not of collapse, but of competition. Not dominance, coordination. Not a single global system. Multiple parallel systems. The question then becomes unavoidable. If a new world economy is being designed right now, who is designing it? And what role will ordinary people play once the blueprint is complete? The answer is not yet clear. But the next section reveals what the emerging systems might look like. Who stands to gain, who stands to lose, and what history suggests happens next when money, power, and technology finally converge. The world is entering an age where economics is no longer merely accounted for. It is engineered. In the last decade, something subtle but monumental has begun unfolding. Nations aren't just adjusting their policies, they are attempting to redesign the global operating system itself. And according to analysts who watch these long arcs of history, moments like this do not appear spontaneously. They surface when old structures reach their breaking point. They emerge when the rules that once guaranteed prosperity begin working against those who created them. Here's what nobody tells you. The New World economy is not being negotiated in the open. It's being assembled quietly, piece by piece, by governments, corporations, and blocs who all know one truth: whoever writes the rules of the next system won't just survive the transition, they'll dominate the century that follows. But here's why this matters. Transitions of this scale always begin with fracture, small visible cracks that signal deeper stress underneath. And today, those cracks are everywhere. The currency system built in 1944 faces unprecedented strain. The supply chain architecture of the 1990s is dissolving under geopolitical tension. The digital infrastructure that powers modern life is increasingly contested territory. And the energy networks that once shaped global alliances are being redrawn around new technologies, new competitors, and new vulnerabilities. Let me show you exactly how this shift is taking shape, and why the pattern mirrors earlier redesigns of the world economy, just far faster, far quieter, and far more complex. One scenario indicates that the emerging blocs forming today resemble the economic coalitions that appeared in the early 20th century. Spheres of influence built around currency preference, energy dependencies, and industrial specialization. A dollar-centric world on one side, a commodity-linked multipolar alternative forming on the other, and a third zone, digital, decentralized, chaotic, rising outside traditional state control. At first, it looked like a technical correction to globalization. Then the bill arrived. Nations realized that the very interdependence that made global trade efficient also made them fragile. Supply chains could vanish in a week. Energy routes could collapse in a day. Access to digital infrastructure could be revoked in an instant. And this is where the pattern begins. Because every great rewrite of the global economy starts with a recognition. The existing system no longer protects the core interests of its most powerful members. But the story doesn't end with fracture. It accelerates with replacement. According to some economists, the world is now experimenting with parallel systems in real time. In settlement networks, in trade agreements, in technological standards, not reform, reinvention. Countries are testing what the next monetary backbone might look like. State-issued digital currencies that bypass the existing financial rails. Commodity-backed agreements that reduce dependence on any single reserve currency. AI-coordinated logistics chains capable of self-optimizing without human intervention. Not old-world treaties. New World protocols. Everyone thought they were safe. They weren't. Because once the architecture begins shifting, every nation must either adapt or fall behind. And the danger wasn't what leaders saw, it was what they ignored. For decades, global trade relied on predictable flows of cheap energy, stable geopolitics, and synchronized economic cycles. That synchronization is evaporating. The world is splitting into asynchronous systems, some accelerating, some stagnating, some failing. And in that divergence lies the seed of the next great transformation. Here's the mechanism behind the shift. Power follows coordination. In 1944, Bretton Woods coordinated currencies. In 1971, the petrodollar coordinated energy markets. In 2001, China's WTO entry coordinated global production. And today, the nations shaping the new system are coordinating technology, AI standards, digital currency interoperability, data governance, rare earth supply chains, and semiconductor access. The empires of the next century may not be geographic, they may be technological. But here's the trap. Coordination also creates dependency. When nations plug into a system designed by another power, they accept the rules that come with it. And analysts suggest that the most strategic countries of the next decade will be those that design systems others must use. This isn't conquest, it's architecture. Quiet, persistent, and immensely powerful. Picture the landscape unfolding, a world where trade routes adjust not to geography, but to digital compatibility. A world where reserve currencies are chosen not by trust in a government, but by stability of an algorithm. A world where energy flows shift toward nations that can store, refine, or transmit it with maximum resilience. A world where global wealth no longer pools around manufacturing strength, but around control of computation, sensor networks, and automated supply chains. One scenario indicates that this transition may lead to a multipolar environment where several economic ecosystems coexist, cooperative in some areas, competitive in others, and entirely incompatible in a few. Another scenario suggests a gradual convergence, where the most efficient model quietly becomes the global norm. And a third scenario, more disruptive, proposes that a sudden crisis could trigger a rapid, chaotic realignment, forcing nations to choose sides overnight. Here's what nobody tells you. Individuals feel the transition far earlier than nations admit it's happening. They feel it in inflation that doesn't behave like inflation used to. They feel it in the price of energy, the volatility of markets, the scarcity of goods once considered abundant. They feel it in the rising cost of borrowing, the declining predictability of jobs, the shifting value of savings. The world economy is being redesigned from the top, but the earliest signals appear at the bottom. Here's why this matters. If history repeats, and it often rhymes, those who understand the direction of the redesign adapt long before the new system is fully built. During the 1970s monetary shift, it was those who understood energy who thrived. During the 1990s globalization wave, it was those who understood supply chains. In the 2020s and 2030s, it may be those who understand technological sovereignty, currency architecture, and geopolitical risk who maintain stability while others face turbulence. But the question remains, what final shape will the new world economy take? Will it be cooperative, built through negotiation, competitive, forged through rivalry, or emergent, arising from millions of decentralized choices across the digital and physical landscape? No single scenario dominates yet. Yet, analysts agree on one point. The rewrite is underway. And now, as nations position themselves for the next chapter, the real question is no longer if the world economy is being redesigned. It's who is rewriting it, and who will be forced to adapt to rules they did not choose. The blueprint is forming. The coalitions are aligning, the rules are shifting, and the next move is already in motion.